Next item on the agenda is the update from our recovery office, and so I think we've got Craig and Mace and Murray and Jeremy from AT are here in support, I believe, if there are any pressing questions in regards to those things. But welcome, Mace, and welcome, Craig.
Kia ora mai tātou, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and members. Good to be here to give you an update today. Just really an acknowledgement first that whilst this update shows some significant progress on the presentation, that we still have communities and homeowners that remain displaced or in some form of harm across the region, and we'll come to that in terms of our social recovery response as well. We'll cover off around natural built environment, categorisation, and the social and community recovery work, and touch on the Storm Response Fund that the Council's put in place as well, and bringing that fund together for coordination. And we will mention transport progress. So just in terms of categorisation, we are just on 73% through that process. We have had, with the recent upsurge of the scheme closing, and we're now at 3,515 people opted in. That is the final number, but it has signalled that we potentially have more in the Category 3 space than we had forecasted. As you'll see, we've got 890 in Category 3, and we'll get to where we're into the buyouts as well. You will see Category 2C advance quite a bit now that we have approval to go ahead with the two Māngere projects in Te Aorata and Harangia. The Category 2C properties, we're expecting 69 properties in that location, which will provide protection to those homeowners and give them relief. There's a focused program working with those communities. In terms of buyouts and removals of home removals, just on 800 property owners are in the buyout process. 687 have received their valuation. So that's a market valuation on the 26th, as of 26th of January 2023, before any damage. 442 have accepted the offer. We haven't had many disputes around valuation, in fact very few, but I would note that gap between receiving an offer and accepting an offer is something we want to bring down and understand with homeowners how we can do that. They are their personal circumstances involved, obviously making a significant decision, but we're wanting to progress that as part of our transition plan and move forward. 341 homes purchased, and now we're starting in the removal of homes, relocation, deconstruction, and where required, demolition. We've got quite a program now across 9 suppliers for around demolition, deconstruction, and putting EOIs out. Potentially 200 to 250 homes would be our forecast and objective if we could relocate and reuse those homes somewhere else in the future. In terms of Category 2C, I think the most significant progress in October was the Royal Assent and Cabinet and the Executive Committee approval of an order in Council to allow us to accelerate the 2 projects in Māngere. And that means that whilst there's no appeal rights to those 2 projects in the normal sense, the Resource Management Act is amended only for those 2 projects. There is an ongoing engagement with the community that will bring 69 homeowners, intolerable risk to life homeowners relief, and further number that will have reduced flooding to flooding and floor level. Community groups, as I said, meeting monthly, and construction plan to commence in March 2025. So it's been really fast following design and build. One of the issues of issuing Category 2Cs to those homeowners is just the final design being confirmed, so we know what the extent of flood relief that's provided, but that's being worked through. Miriwai, the engineered bund that was to protect Domain Crescent and four homes was found to be uneconomic. So we progressed to purchase those homes in a more economic outcome, and that's well underway. But we are also, aside from that, delivering stormwater network improvements in Miriwai to improve the management of stormwater and reduce the impacts of flooding and potential landslips to that community. Really now turning to the Making Space for Water program, which is quite a broad program and funded out of the Storm Recovery Fund that the council funded through the long-term plan. These projects really are aimed at improving our intelligence and improving response to maintenance. So the hotspot cameras in particular, there's AI involved in those, so really that then alert our maintenance contractors to any blockages and allow a really rapid response to alleviate those problems that may occur or have occurred in catchments over time. And you'll see the other part of the program that's being delivered in those locations. Social recovery, so a really significant part of what we do and have been doing is the social and community recovery. And you heard some of that this morning from the STAR group as well, how critical that is for communities to be able to move on and rebuild their lives, which is part of our purpose in recovery. Navigators have supported over 2,000 families through this process, the navigation service, and we're now supporting 810. So whilst it's still a significant amount, we are seeing the trend in the right direction, and people have been able to move on with their lives for those most affected homeowners and communities. The service has been extended with some reduced capacity through until June 2025 with the council and our community partner navigators that we're funding within the community. And community partners continue to provide wellbeing support into the communities. I thought it was worth just and acknowledging Murray Burt here from Auckland Transport, but worth acknowledging the partnership with our recovery partners, Auckland Transport and others. Murray, without stealing your thunder, really it's 77% of the transport network projects have been completed, and you can see the splits there between major projects and minor projects. But we will see a real target, I know, of the 20th of December to get roads that have been closed open. That program will run through, probably extending beyond the middle of the year next year, 2025. But I think unlocking the maintenance contractors to deliver these projects had led to a much more rapid response and the learnings around how we can respond quickly to ensure that people can get to and from their homes safely and to and from work and in their community, so important in their communities. And we've been asked to have some assistance, or I believe Auckland Transport have, in the Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti to share some of those learnings to allow more rapid response. Just lastly, and this is in your pack, councillors, I'm not going to run through this, but these are the projects and 4 key programs funded by the Storm Response Fund. Package 1 is about that proactive maintenance and monitoring, and I've touched on that. Package 2 is about strengthening Auckland emergency management, and that's well reported through to the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Committee. Package 3, providing people with better targeted information around climate change and an unstable climate. And then 4, the coordination of capital works and land use planning. And just to acknowledge, there is work as part of our funding agreement with the Crown around a national adaptation framework that is progressing by the Ministry for the Environment, but we're yet to see that reported back. So Craig, Murray and myself are happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mace. Questions? First up, Julie.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you for this really comprehensive update. I do have a few questions, sorry, Chair. The 40% opt-in for the Category 3, there's some commentary there that suggests that you're comfortable with that level of opt-in. What's that sort of based on? Do we have some comparators, say with Christchurch or overseas disasters? 40% sounds like a lot, but also there's 60% who didn't. So how are we determining that 40% is a reasonably good result?
So which paragraph are you looking at, Councillor Fury?
I started writing down the paragraph numbers for from the next question onwards, but not this one, sorry. I'll see if I can find it. Maybe we come back to that question. Yeah. So if I ask my next question while we work that out, if that's okay, Chair. So this one's para 14. So this is talking about the navigator support. In noting that the categorisation has closed, is it possible for new whānau to seek to be added to the navigator support though?
The short answer is, of course,
Okay,
the
great.
navigator service will run through to at least the middle of next year. Yeah. We've been able to secure funding for that.
Thank you. Going back to that earlier question, Desi tells me it's para 4. There we go.
40% was successful with around 40% of identified high-risk property choosing to opt in.
Yeah.
So that really relates to that proactive door knocking that we've done and gone out. There's no benchmark for that, but so we targeted those high-risk properties that we'd identified through our home-by-home assessments, and then our response to that for people opting in was 40%. So we don't have a benchmark, Councillor.
Okay.
But we are pleased that people are opting in when they're in those high-risk situations.
So something perhaps to come back with then is an understanding of why people who didn't opt in didn't. I mean, obviously there's some where we just couldn't contact them, but there will be others where people have consciously chosen not to. So I'd be really interested in what the trends are there, because, we will potentially have a process like this again in the future, and be good to be able to identify as many of those barriers that we can overcome in the future as possible.
Thanks, Councillor Fury. I mean, it is much higher than the more general opt-in process, so that targeted opt-in, but certainly we are commissioning some lessons learnt from this process, and those will be one of the things we look at. Thank you.
Great, and I think probably capturing that in that February conversation that you've indicated in here about the lessons learned would be great. The 2P not being, so this is para 21, 2P not being eligible for the temporary accommodation assistance or scheme, and I know we've got another conversation happening about the trust's property, and I'll put that to one side. 2P not being eligible, that's going to create some issues for people who need to move out of their home during, say, lifting. How are we expecting insurance companies will be assisting people in that circumstance if central government support's not available?
I think it'd be a case-by-case issue, Councillor Fury, but our support through the navigation service, we do have an insurance specialist, two, and that's proved very valuable for homeowners in terms of making sure they get their entitlements and supporting them.
So we don't have an easy answer on that one, but we'll keep a brief. Okay, keep watching. Okay. A question around 39, which is the multi-unit and the special circumstances, and you've got a really useful thing in the dashboard about special circumstances. That's page 18 in the attachments for those who are looking, second page of the dashboard. I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more, please, to sort of some of the trends with those special circumstances. There's a lot there that are under unique, and there isn't a category for multi-dwelling units. So I wondered if that's where the multi-unit ones are sitting, is under unique, or what's sort of going on there, because most of the rest of the breakdown all makes sense, but unique is huge. Are there any trends within unique, particularly around multi-units? I've got a number of multi-unit cases.
There are a number, Councillor Fury. I don't have the number right here, but we are aware of 78 buildings, which are multi-unit titles, across 178, 341, I think it is, units currently. Off the top of my head, that number changes.
Yep.
Those are quite complex, as you say. So a number of those are in the unique special circumstances. The other category captured there is financial hardship.
Yes.
And that's not eligible in the policy. And then there are other various circumstances where people are seeking to go outside the scheme
in some way
to get relief where they find themselves.
And
so a wide variety.
Yeah. And how are we going, and this is probably a Craig question, on meeting the timeframes around some of those disputes and special circumstances, because they were quite ambitious.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I don't have those numbers directly in front of me, but I can come back to you. I know we have sped up the process quite considerably. We've brought extra resource in, so we now have a couple of lawyers working on our special disputes as well with the team. So it is an area of focus, but I'll come back to you with the accurate numbers.
Great. I only have 2 more questions, Chair. I'm getting the look from Andy. One is just making sure that we're going to do some public comms around this, because I'm getting a lot of people going, oh, we don't feel like council's done anything since the storms, but we need to tell that story. So is that coming?
Absolutely.
Great. Cool. That was a quick one.
Theory.
And then my last one is probably more for Murray, but I noticed that there's a mention in the making space for water portion of the update. This is again in the attachments. That there's work coming on agreement with Auckland Transport for changes to roadside drainage expectations. I have a lot of areas where what happened in the road corridor had a big impact on residential properties. Can you just give us a little bit more of an idea of what that is? And I mean, are we talking about the role of berms? Are we talking about the camber of the road? Are we talking about who takes responsibility for some of those stormwater assets that have sort of mixed responsibility depending on how high above the ground they are? What's sort of just a quick 20 seconds on what we should expect to be happening in that space, because it's the first I've heard of that work, which sounds really important.
We have a service level agreement with Healthy Waters, between Healthy Waters and Auckland Transport, which defines roles and responsibilities when it comes to management of drainage in the road corridor. So that's in place. I think that this mention in the report today is around the interaction with the blue-green networks and the road network. So there's a number of projects in place where we're looking at upsizing culverts to increase the capacity for water to flow under the road and so on. So it's definitely around that. I'm not sure exactly the full extent of the engagement with Healthy Waters, but we have a close working relationship and we can come back to you with more information.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Can I firstly say thank you? I appreciate for Julie and I the fact that you've taken the trouble to come and do site visits. There's still a high level of anxiety within our community, and so my questions probably are unashamedly parochial by nature in terms of where my concerns are. There is growing interest you refer to and some of this may be material that you'll be reporting back to the December meeting of this committee, growing interest in the future use of storm impacted land. Can you speak further to that?
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Yeah, we are reporting back to you in February.
Okay.
On the principles around the policy development for the future of storm-affected land.
But just in a general sense, do you have a flavour?
The flavour, Councillor Fletcher, is obviously some of that land is required for making space for water, the blue-green network, for example, of improving the stormwater network. Other areas are certainly hazard areas in terms of the landslip locations and will become more of an amenity provision. And then there's opportunities potentially for redevelopment of some of the land for other purposes once resilience is put in place, but it has a really long time frame around it, or alternative uses in the meantime, so the land that for non-residential use. And lastly, around where there's a provision gap in the open space network and the land can safely meet that provision gap, then those opportunities will be there.
Thank you for that, Mace. I think scoping that in the way that you have will be really helpful for people as we work through until February. So I've been concerned about the Storm Response Fund and whether there's sufficient funding in this package. But there has been a question posed to me by the Albert Eden Local Board Chair about whether the people of Albert Eden with an equity lens will not be adversely impacted, because anything of this nature is traumatising. It doesn't matter where within the region you are living, it's still a traumatic event in your life. Can you give me the assurance today that I can relay that to the people living in the Albert Eden community, that they will not be negatively affected and they will be treated equitably?
Certainly, Councillor, we're taking an equity lens across the whole region in what we do. Certainly equity is top of our minds in terms of how people are.
I take great comfort from your response, so thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. How worried should I be about point 6, which is higher than current forecast into buying into category 3, and point 33, that the home removals are also, the cost associated with home removals are also higher than forecast? i.e., do you think we've got enough elastic in the budget? Because I'm not sure where you're going to get any more money from.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Appreciate the question and in terms of the potential risks. So we have outlined the risks. I think the Chief Executive in his report to the governing body outlined that our forecast now, given the upsurge in opting in and our case-by-case assessments across the region, indicated an increase up to potentially 1,200 Category 3 homes. So really that would be a retreat. But our work with Cyclone Recovery Unit and Crown Infrastructure Partners and agreement through Cabinet last year, earlier this year, has allowed as long as we stay within the envelope, that will be funded. Of course, there's a balance and a trade-off between retreat and resilience funding, and that's what we'll be reporting to this committee on the 5th of December, along with 2 priority business cases for resilience projects.
Thanks, that gives me a lot more confidence.
I do want to be really clear on this point, that there is a potential cost pressure here. We're watching it closely, and Mace is correct. There are useful discussions with central government in terms of the broader funding envelope, yes, but it may be, I'm signalling this, it may be that there's a cost pressure that we need to discuss through the annual plan process. So, watch this space, really.
Yeah. That sort of, yeah. Did you want to say something, Craig?
Kia ora. Thanks, Councillor. Just going to touch on the house removal program. So that's ramping up quite considerably now. We removed 33 homes between 1st of October and today, which is good progress, aiming at 30 per month. The costs to date have been higher than budgeted. We were budgeting $52,000 per site. We're currently around about the $84,000 mark. A lot of that driven by the fact that those first home removals were in Muriwai, Piha, Karikari, so quite precarious sites with a lot of considerations around health and safety. We've found asbestos in probably more properties than we anticipated as well, which has driven costs up, but we do anticipate those costs will drop down as we get into areas where it's easier to remove houses. Currently 30% of the properties we're removing are being relocated, which is a real success story, and around about 45% of dwellings are being deconstructed rather than demolished, so not trying to reduce waste to landfill. We are reporting back to you in December with more detail on this.
Yeah, that was my sort of positive lens from that, please talk about the positive things that we're doing with the houses that we are removing, i.e. recycling, moving them somewhere else, doing other things that actually means we don't just level them and chuck it all away. So I appreciate that. I also want to ask Murray, you about point 8, because that is what the STAR group have talked about. That is that you've spent 81% of your budget and 74% from the flood recovery program, and 74% identified sites have been completed. Do you believe then that you may have some unspent budget by the time you get to the end?
The most complex sites are the ones that are at the end of the program, so therefore the most costly. So the two numbers are not aligned. But what we are forecasting, as was said previously, is that there could be around a $5 million underspend of the original budget allocation, and that's based on forecasting. But the work is in progress, and like I said, the more expensive, more costly sites towards the end, like Millflat Road Bridge and some other more complex sites.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ken?
Thank you. 3 questions, please. First of all, Craig, about these houses, 1,200 houses, and we've removed 35 so far. Getting complaints with people who have got, like on Earlich Road, where there's 12 houses sitting there that we own, squatters, vermin not being cleaned, the grounds and stuff not being mowed. How are we going to manage that? What are we doing to manage? We said we would manage that.
Yeah, I think 2 components to that question, Councillor. The first one is, can we go faster on demolishing, deconstruction, removing? We are working on that currently. So we currently have 11 contractors who were appointed through a procurement process and a panel. They're managing 7 geographic locations. We are looking to increase that, and again, that'll be part of the paper we bring back to you in December. So, but having said that, we won't be in a position to have removed every house until probably the end of 2026, we're predicting. So there will be houses sitting empty for periods, and that's another consideration. The second part of the answer is around how we manage that dynamic where people where we do have squatters, we are having vandalism, graffiti and the likes. We are working on a maintenance program currently and how we manage the likes of grass and damage to properties, but that's still a work in progress.
So there's no message to give back to these people yet that the vermin and the squatters and the problems next door are going to be managed?
We are addressing them on a case-by-case basis, but at this stage I'd prefer to come back to you with a strategy document.
Thank you. Two questions from Transport, please, Mr. Burt. The slips you talked about being repaired, hard to understand those figures. Do you have a categorisation for the slips? Like, are the slips on that number up there that you've got, every slip with cones around it, or is it just every subsidence anywhere, or anywhere where there's dirt over the curb, or is there a categorisation for your slips?
Yeah, there's a lot of detail in behind the report, and every slip site's been assessed and categorised, major, minor, or able to be immediately addressed. The figures that you saw on the report only relate to the 2023 storm event. So there are other slips across the network related to other pre-existing slow-moving landslides and so on. So it doesn't cover every single slip on the network, but relates to the 2023 event.
Okay, thank you. And last question. I did a site visit on the Scenic Drive with Mr. Potter the other day and stuff. Learned there that those slips, the resource consents are being gained in retrospect. So we see them as so important that we're under emergencies. We've been able to do all the work, and the consents and all that costing, etc., is being done in retrospect. Is that all the slips or just those ones?
So under emergency legislation, there's the ability to do things much faster than under a normal process. So we've been operating, obviously, for the 23 event under the rules for emergency response, and that allows retrospective consent applications. So that rule doesn't relate to every single slip on the network, only for the emergency-related ones.
Thanks, Ken. Richard?
Thank you, Chair. My first question is a little bit like Councillor Turner's. We're getting to the sort of sharp end of a lot of complex cases. Is there a way to help link the consents of these issues with the 2P? Often we're funding a 2P issue, but then maybe the consent doesn't get granted for it, or they get to the point where they've got a 2P, but then suddenly we've got another many-month process through consents. I know there's obviously legal, we can't have people jumping the queue or whatever. And then there's other issues around how we help, in this case, if we do this grant process for the Auckland Transport support, will there be a sort of potentially a project manager to help people through that case? And that would also be along issues we've had with Healthy Waters Land, water care, and our reserves, which are many hundred across Auckland. In my experience on the shore, there's probably many hundred on the shore, unfortunately.
Through the chair, if I perhaps address the question around 2P first. So we do have obviously our navigators who are helping property owners through this process. We also have property advisors, so they help out, and we have a 2P dedicated team who also go in and help out. In terms of consents, if it's basically an adjustment to a property on the same footprint, it doesn't need a consent. Where a consent's involved, we do put that through our streamline team in the resource consents area, which is prioritising and supporting those consents.
Okay, so I just keep sending those examples up to you, because in my experience it's not always the case
there are always exceptions and unique situations and complexities involved in these. I mean, we really do need to look at them on a case by case basis.
And my next question, and some of that might be in relation to our hazards plan change, which we hope to enact when the government allows, what does happen to those 2,000 or more homes? It's great to see we're increasing the numbers where we can, but what happens to those 2,000 odd homes that we aren't able to give money to through the categorisation, but what sits on their limb going forward? What kind of future I know that's a broad statement for individual properties, but there's a lot of pain out there for those who maybe thought they would get bought out and they just don't reach the threshold, and we don't have another $2 or $3 billion to help.
Yeah, thank you. You're referring to Category 1 properties, Councillor, yeah. Look, I mean, there are a lot of people in very awkward situations. We acknowledge that, where there might be costs associated with remediating a property, but they don't meet the criteria. That is falling back on those individuals. In terms of what's on the limb or the property file, I mean, things like floodplains are identified anyway. So there is no more information other than the fact they are a Category 1. I mean, that does sit on their limb. But yeah, so most of the information related to natural hazards is there regardless.
And very last question, thanks, Chair. So Councillor Dalton and I have spoken to Select Committee on National Adaptation Plan and also the inquiry. Our officials, this team or Phil Wilson, speaking to government about where do we get this national direction? Like, we cannot, if this happened again beginning of next year, I don't foresee this process coming again. And we've seen in South Dunedin the government kind of push back on, sorry, I got some distraction behind me, but what will be, have you been talking to officials around when are we going to get some sort of national direction? Because it seems fairly scary 2 years on that we still don't have a way through this process around manage retreat or policy around insurance making our planning decisions for us, etc.
We have been in discussions, but this is happening at a national level with a number of players, not exclusively obviously in relation to Auckland, because the concerns for a national response. I have to say I've got no clarity on when an answer will arrive. or what that is likely to be. I think it's an area that there should be continued advocacy around at a political level, and we will continue the engagement with others, with MFE who are leading that body of work.
Thank you, Richard. Honey.
Kia ora. Just a couple of questions around funding and the engagement or partnership with Māori, directly with iwi. What was the percentage of funding given to iwi to actually, I think the word you used, meaningful participation, or kaitiakitanga? What was the percentage?
Kia ora, Member Renata. I can't give you the actual percentage. We can look at that in terms of across the board. But our procurement process, through particularly the removal of homes, procurement has high number of, or reasonably higher number than our procurement rules. Our procurement settings predict for companies involved, as well as we have 3 iwi groups who are assisting with the recovery planning work that we're doing within communities and iwi, assisting with cultural heritage inventory as well.
It'd be great if you can get that info back. And I just wanted to add, Christine Fletcher, and you made a comment about equity. It's good to hear that you've actually identified, because that is a big issue for us sitting within Auckland, and how that is engaged directly in terms of the procurement spaces as well.
Okay, any further questions? None. I think Deputy Mayor's happy to move. There a seconder. Thank you, Christine. Any discussion or debate? Well done. All right, those in favour say aye, and against carried. Thank you. Okay, item 10. The resolving road reserve damage, and you'll note up there are some chairs wrecks that